Right, everyone. Welcome to a special Thursday edition of Lunch Break. Welcome, everyone. We usually have these on Fridays, but since tomorrow is technically the holiday, we decided to bring in Vivian today, and we are super excited for this conversation. But before we dive in, I want to give a little bit of a background in terms of who we are and what we're doing. We are Las Comadres, an inclusive community of women entrepreneurs. And we have had this series called Lunch Break, which we've revived over the past few weeks with a very specific intention. As a community, we take that word inclusive very seriously. And part of what we have felt really called to do is step up to what it really means to have an inclusive community in the time where the racial justice movement has really awakened and there's been such an uprising. And for us, it's really important that we dive into different conversations around what this all means, not just around police brutality, but like really this is something that as many of us have been educating ourselves on over the past few weeks and months, that permeates every single part of our lives. And so entrepreneurship is no exception. And we wanted to bring in, I actually was thinking about how to introduce you, Vivian, and I was like, you're our residence like Renaissance woman. Like Vivian is just like, she is all the things. And so I am going to take a few moments to read through her bio and introduce her. So Vivian Olodun is a serial entrepreneur, micro-influencer, and author. She is a rising star speaking honestly with her peers about what it's like to build a business that serves the rich and famous. Vivian is the ghostwriter behind luxury real estate articles published in Miami Herald and the Sentinel. She co-founded a boutique marketing firm that has grown to over 6 figures in less than 2 years. She also has a nonprofit, Behind the Leaf, which hosts Flourish Media Conference, which was amazing. And it was probably like the last conference that happened in the world. Because it happened back in
Great timing.
Miami. My God. So, and introducing her little black book of millionaires to small business owners looking for angel investors. Vivian is unapologetically Black, and she doesn't hide her Afro-Latino and Nigerian heritage. She candidly jokes about her position as an advisor to thought leaders while facing the fact that she is often the only brown girl in the room. She's professional and witty and bravely pulling back the curtain to show that if she can do it, so can you. And this is the best possible. Like, I love that bio because it is like all things Vivian. So welcome, my dear. We're so excited to have you with us today.
Thank you. And I'm so glad to be here. I highly recommend you all. I am a card-carrying member of Las Comadres. Big fan.
Yes.
All good people.
It's amazing. Vivian is such an active member of our community, and we love having her sharing her wisdom and just your vibe. We love having you around, my friend. And so, when we and Vivian and I go way back. We go back, like I was thinking, it's been like 4 years since.
Yes, it has.
Yes.
Yeah, Little Havana.
That's
And I
right.
saw the value there, and I see the value every day. I mean, having a community is so essential. And I think all of us have been able to see that in the fact of with COVID, that our traditional methods of building community have been just ripped apart. So
Yeah.
being able to, continue that through this community has been really valuable in this
Yes.
time.
Yes. And so for us, like even I just want to preface everything with like a bit of a personal note. Like for us, I feel like both Vivian and I are we are hosts of communities of self-identifying women. And I think, yes, like COVID has changed everything, but I also think that there's something about what's been happening in this general awakening or waking up of consciousness of people and really coming to fully grasp and understand the extent to which racism and white supremacy kind of like just is woven into so many different parts of our lives and also our businesses. And I think that, over the past few weeks, we've been having more broadly general conversations, but we thought it was really important to bring Vivian on because these kinds of conversations kind of would keep coming up in our own kind of gatherings as comadres, to really just dive deeper into the entrepreneurship space and how like what the Black experience is in the entrepreneurship space in the context of all of this. And so I want to start kind of just taking a few steps back though with a bit of a more personal question to you, Vivian. So could you share with us when you decided to become an entrepreneur? And Vivian has also, please plug your book, because Vivian has an amazing book that has like a lot of her experiences.
I will get it.
Yes. Stumbling Through Adulthood.
Yes. So Stumbling Through Adulthood is my book. It is available as an audiobook, a paperback, and an ebook, and you can find it on Amazon. And it was my story when it comes to entrepreneurship is that I never ever wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I think that's important for people to know, because when you meet me as I stand now, you may think that this is something I aspire to do, and you would be wrong. I wanted I wanted to work in the government. I'd always intended to be a foreign affairs officer. I studied political science, public administration, and I, have 3 degrees, and those are the things that I wanted to pursue. I come from a military family. My mother is from Panama. My father is from Nigeria. Both of them were in the military. I know exactly what it feels like to have a stable life and to have other people telling you what to do, and you just execute things, and having that whole military mind is very much embedded in me. However, when I went to college during the recession, and 2 years into my college career, the job that I wanted, that I had prepared myself for the last, 14 years, disappeared. It wasn't available anymore. They got rid of the job. It was to be a condoleezza officer for the Foreign Affairs Office. Wow. So with that job, what you would do is work in the U.S. embassies. It was a commitment of 25 years, and you'd spend 3 years in 5 different countries, and then 2 years in D.C. learning the language and the culture of that country, so that when you went there, you would be able to communicate with the people in the embassy. Beautiful, perfect job for me. Wow. I thought. Perfect job. And I'd known about it my whole life, because my entire life, my parents had been in the military. So I knew that that was where I was going. And it just didn't become an option for me. So I became an entrepreneur because at the same time, while I was in college, I was putting on fashion shows. I was a member of Fashion Club, and I went to a boutique one day, and I just really wanted this dress, and I didn't have the money to buy the dress. And I asked the boutique owner if I could put on a fashion show and get people to shop in your store. Can I have this dress for free? And she said, yeah. And she let me walk out of the store with thousands of dollars of clothing. Yeah. And I put on the fashion show at Barry University. Shout out to the Buccaneers. We just had an awesome talk yesterday. And when we did the fashion show, we made so much money that the university didn't allow us to keep the funds on campus. And we were told that we had to get an EIN number, get a business bank account. Wow. And that's how I became an entrepreneur. That's really it. It's just, I was forced to do it. I was forced to do it because I have a very good relationship with money. Money goes out of its way to come and find me. I pay attention to what people like. So when you provide a service or you solve a problem for people, they are always going to want to pay for it. It's a very natural cycle. And so that's what happened years ago, where I became an entrepreneur. But this business that I have right now, the same scenario. I was working for Coldwell Banker, which is a residential real estate company. I had at this time been in marketing for a while. And my job was to take care of the agents from Orlando down to Key West in Florida, the East Coast. And in servicing those agents, I was able to work on the sale of the Versace mansion, for Scottie Pippen's home, for Matt Damon's home, a lot of individuals. And in selling those homes, we would prepare a marketing strategy. It takes strategy to sell something for 7 figures. And when the deal would close, the agent would say, well, you know how to do this. Can you do this for my laundromat, for my t-shirt brand, for my hair care line, for my whatever? And they kept doing that. And the Coldwell Banker finally asked me, Vivian, can you please open a for-profit business? Because my first business was nonprofit.
Yeah.
And I keep it active. And the reason why I chose to make it nonprofit is because you don't have to pay dividends to the board of directors. Very simple legal reason. And I opened my for-profit business, and they started to pay me twice. I would get my regular salary, and then I would get paid for every agent that I was helping. And then slowly the opportunities that grew with that just even out with my paycheck. And it was a simple decision. It just didn't make sense for me to let other people control my time.
Yeah.
And so then I just said, okay, I'm going to try this full time. And that was 6 years ago.
I was going to ask 6 years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it came out of your natural ability. You were just, you know what, I'm good at this. I'm going to do it on my own.
Yeah, that was it. That
Cool.
was it.
So I want to kick off our conversation also with sharing a statistic that I found that was really interesting. So according to the State of Women-Owned Businesses report, women of color account for 89% of the new businesses opened every day over the past year. This number has grown faster than the overall rate of new women-owned businesses in the past 5 years, 21% versus 43%. And the number of firms owned by African-American women grew even faster at 50%. And I feel like we hear numbers like these relatively frequently. And I think like people just kind of from a superficial place say like, oh, this is great. Like, this is great. Women are starting more businesses. But I really would love to dive deeper into your assessment of why this happens and why this happens in this way and why Black women are starting so many of their own businesses. Let's dive like deeper into those numbers in terms of like what you, from what you know, what you would attribute this to.
Well, I think that that's a wonderful statistic, and I'm glad that you're sharing it. And I love that you've naturally shared it from an asset perspective. And I don't know that those listening would be able to pick up on that right away and understand how important that is, because when we have conversations about minorities, and especially about Black women who are opening businesses, and also Black women who are achieving higher education at extraordinary rates, we hear about it from a deficit perspective, from those people who are actually suffering from white supremacy and they don't even know it. And that's when they're talking about, oh, Black people are opening businesses, but maybe they are not seeing the same amount of growth, or they're not seeing the same amount of scalability. They're not seeing the same amount of profitability. But I love that as we're having this conversation, we're talking about it from we are dominating that space in opening these new businesses, and we have to ask ourselves why. And when I talk about my previous corporate experiences, I usually speak about it from a positive perspective because I am a positive person. But make no mistake that there were several instances where I was made to feel uncomfortable in my corporate positions. And that was a part of why I decided to leave, because you get tired of being gaslit and convinced that you're crazy. Or my favorite phrase that I used to hear all of the time was, you must be confused, which is very insulting. It's just like if we have a meeting today, and this I experienced it this week actually, working with a corporate partner, of having a phone call that's scheduled for maybe 9 a.m. and then the person doesn't show up at 9 a.m. So you send them an email and you simply say, I'm waiting for you on the call. And it's now 9:15 and the person tells you, oh, you must be confused. Our meeting was at 9:30, but there's a long email list of, no, it's today and it's at 9. And so to be in those very small situations, but to be in them every day is a lot. I can remember, and I even talk about it in my book, Stumbling Through Adulthood, which at the time when I wrote the book, I made the commitment to simply be honest in my book and the situations that I've been through. And I had no idea that the world was going to blow up the way that it has. to allow me to talk about these things even more so. But little things like right now I have faux locks. I do not have dreadlocks, people. These are faux locks. They're fake locks that I put in my hair. And I can remember going to work and having braids, for example, and people coming and touching my hair and telling me, "Oh, you have ropes in your hair," or have people wanting to have a conversation about. I can remember sitting with agents who are lovely people. And I like Tory Burch. Tory Burch is one of my favorite designers. And I would sit with my, just my flat shoes. If you've seen Tory Burch, you know what her logo looks like. And someone said to me, "Oh, I wanted to send you the coupon code for Tory Burch because I know you like to wear those shoes, but I would never wear them because they look like swastikas." Her logo looks like a swastika. And I'm just like, oh, okay. And then in the same vein, same day, same conversation. This is when I forget his name now, but he won the Olympics, the Special Olympics, and he shot his girlfriend in South Africa.
That's right. Yes, I remember the case, but yeah.
Yeah, so same day, same person, same group of people who were from South Africa, and started to say how dangerous South Africa was, and how the mixing of all the different cultures and the different people, and how it used to be so much better, but when things changed, that they decided to leave South Africa and come to the US because the US was more in line with what they believed in. Now, as a minority person who's well educated listening to this, I'm hearing you're saying to me that it was better for you when apartheid, the most well documented racist regime in modern
Rights
history.
violations, yeah.
Okay, but that was a better time for you. And that you left there to come here to the United States because you felt like it was better for you here
yeah.
than in apartheid South Africa.
Yeah.
And this is the same person who would turn around and hire me because they have a whole bunch of different units, and they wanted me to market their units online, and they come to me for all kind of information with social media. It's the same environment, and that can become a lot for minority people.
Yeah.
Ultimately when I decided to leave, yes, I left because I had the opportunity to have income from my personal contacts and things of that nature. But I also left because at the same time, I was going back and forth about a raise for 2 months. And it was a $15,000 raise. I'll never forget it. I even documented it in my book. And I was just struggling with, I bring so much value here, and I don't understand why I have to fight and fuss over this $15,000. Like, it just doesn't make any sense when I have different agents who are closing 7-figure deals for the company. It's not like I'm not aware of my ask. I know what I'm asking, and I know what my contemporaries make as well. So those kind of things are very frustrating. And ultimately, I was told that I do an amazing job and that I could participate in a leadership program that they have within the company. And I asked a question, how long do I have to be a part of this leadership program before I'm going to have an opportunity to advance? And thank God the person was just honest with me and said, it could be anywhere from 7 to 15 years. What? And then when I look at the executive board members, and none of them look like me, and the only other person who did actually take that program and excel, it took her 20 years, because I asked her. It took 20 years. And it's, do I want to give up 20 years of my life to be able to get to the next level? And I think that there's a lot of very highly educated Black people who can see the writing on the wall and understand that the systems are not necessarily built for them to succeed. So how much effort do you put into it before you have to say, like, I'm just going to give it a try. I'll open my own business, because what risk am I really taking? Because if I stay at this company for 20 years or 50 years or 17 years or 5, I'm still not going to be able to hit the same levels as my counterparts anyway. So it seems risky, but it isn't really.
Yeah. I think it's really a fascinating conversation because for a lot of a lot of a lot of women in general who decide to venture off and start their own businesses, it is because they feel some version of what you are describing, in the sense that the system isn't built for us. That, you know, like for instance, for me, like a huge reason why I decided to become an entrepreneur is I was already a mom. I was a single mom, and I just wanted to spend more time with my kid. And I realized, like, I am sitting here, for me, it was like, I'm sitting here, I'm getting paid to manage toxic masculinity all day long. Like, yes, like this is like, I am 50%
Yes.
of my time sitting in this
Yeah.
office, I am doing what I love to do. The other 50%, I am managing people's BS. I would rather like find a way to make the money that I need to make on my own time and hang out with my kid, right? And I think that that like, to that reality that sort of a lot of women face as they are thinking about like alternative ways of planning their lives or having other priorities, whether it's family or whatever it is, to that you add the reality of racism, the reality of the fact that you look around and nobody looks like you, the reality of an environment where you are being asked to act in a way that is not how you are, to look in a way that is not how you are, where you're being judged all the time. I feel like one of the things that's been really interesting that I've been noticing, lots of conversations online about people being very frank about what it's like for Black people in corporate America. I saw this thing about how Black people can't be, like, aren't allowed to be introverts, but they're also
No, not at all.
but also not allowed to be super extroverts, right? Like they, like, you have to fit this very particular mold in order to comply and play along to maybe one day.
Yeah,
Like,
the maybe is the killer, because you know when you go there, I mean, look at the statistics, you all who are watching this. Black women are the #1 highly educated demographic in the United States, period. Think about that. But when you finish school, now that you're aware, I mean, I think we've all heard the term that ignorance is bliss. How happy can you be when you know better? Now you know better, so you're very aware when someone is gaslighting you, when they are undermining you, when they are speaking down to you. There's so many different situations where you don't have the benefit of being ignorant. You
yeah,
just are very well aware that you're being treated poorly, and you have to make the decision: am I going to allow myself to continue to be abused, or am I going to at least try to do something different?
yeah, yeah, 100%. And so, and a lot of women do choose then to do something different, right? And I'd love to sort of like dive deeper into that decision, because I'm sure it's not easy, because obviously the decision to be an entrepreneur isn't easy for anyone. But one of the things that I've always found fascinating, and Vivian and I have had this conversation before, is about, okay, like let's say you decide to become an entrepreneur. And one of the things that those of us who have wised up into this have realized, like, okay, I'm going to become an entrepreneur. I need community, right? Like that the next, hopefully it doesn't take you too long between one decision and the other realization, because it is such a huge part of how you, just how you become known, how you learn, how you share, how you kind of learn from each other in this new, you're kind of diving into a whole new world, right? And just to be really frank, I've spoken to a lot of Black women friends over the years, and they've been very frank about how they felt like they needed to almost, when they became entrepreneurs, then create their own communities with other Black women in order to be able to fully thrive and be celebrated for who they are, without feeling like, oh, I'm just jumping into another community where it's like another version of the corporate America that I was leaving, where like the standards of success and the standards of how you're supposed to show up are based on being white, right?
Yeah, and you know, we've been having conversations about this and seeing it in action, actually, in a lot of these women empowerment groups or women empowerment Facebook groups. It's been well documented, and everybody's been talking about what's going on in Marie Folio's group, for example, who is well known because of B School and the things that she's been able to put together. And the reality is that these communities have been set up without thinking about how does it apply to minority people, Black women to Asian women to East Asian women, does it truly apply to everyone? Because there is a story that's being told that if you're not successful in entrepreneurship, it's because you didn't do something right, or because you didn't follow my program step by step. But it doesn't take into account that maybe your program really did depend on someone liking seeing a white face and being able to connect with that. I can remember there were situations in corporate America with me, going back to not being able to be an introvert and then not being able to be an extrovert either, is that I've always had a pretty active personal life. I like people, like to go out. I am an extrovert, so I love people. And I can remember there was a phase where I had a supervisor who had become oddly obsessed with knowing what I was doing when I was not at work. She just really wanted to know what I did every day when I wasn't at work. And I thought it was so weird because it wasn't coming from a genuine space. It felt like an investigation of some kind. And I had to confront her about it because I said, I want us to get along, but I want you to know that I don't need to be your best friend in order for us to work together. I don't know if that's a requirement for you, but it makes me uncomfortable that you're trying so hard to get to know what I do when I'm not at work. Now, I will say this is when I was single and I used to date like a lot of NFL players. So I would get invited to like a lot of stuff. Yes. And so I would be, and I have always had a very exciting personal life. So, I was like going to like Jamie Foxx's like parties or like hanging out with celebrities and stuff like that. But that's because I worked for the Miami Heat when I was in college and I was able to meet all of those people in my last work environment. But I didn't think it was necessary that I needed to go into some deep dive story with this woman for that purpose. So, I mean, when we were building these different communities, it's making space because I've seen myself where conversations around Black Lives Matter have been shut down, or, asking to have more inclusive um, people on different panels and things of that nature. I can remember, and I don't need to hesitate to say that when Create Cultivate decided to come down here to Miami, I sent them an email because their entire panel didn't have any minority faces. And I mean, no Spanish, nothing. And I emailed them and I said, listen, please don't bring drama to Miami. This is a very inclusive community. We expect to see Spanish, Black, Creole. We expect to see these type of people represented in your panel. And it's off-putting to me that what you presented is a very white display of what success can be for women. And to their credit, they wrote me back. They asked me for names of people to recommend. They did not dismiss me at all. But I did have to write them and tell them, diversity is intentional and this doesn't look good at all. And it's not going to, I mean, people are going to say something. And at the same time, they have also been called out in several large organizations that claim to be pro woman entrepreneur, and the Black faces are just missing.
Yes, it's been really, really fascinating to me, not just the fact that they've been called out, but the defensive reaction. Like, that's the part that I'm always the most struck by, because I feel like, I don't know, maybe it's because of like years of therapy and shadow work, but I feel like I've gotten to a place in my life where like I'm like I'm able to acknowledge, like, you know what, actually you're right, actually I fucked that up, like actually I would like to learn more about that, like I like coming at it from a place of humility and kind of saying, like, you know what, I would like to learn and to do better. I think it's such a different, it would have been received so differently, but I think it's also such a function of how deeply interwoven this this white like standard is. It's like, this is the bar, like this is it. And so the moment that it gets like I talk about this with Lutzi Segu quite a bit, like the moment that it gets like poked just a little bit, it like crumbles.
It's like, no.
Yeah.
Like,
But
it's
it's
like, I don't know why.
oh girl, like all you had to say was like look at what's happening and listen to the voices, because it is true. I think like one of the most heartbreaking things about these communities that have been so open about, oh, we represent all women and we want women to raise their voices and we want you to be empowered. And I'm like, well, who were you really talking about? Right? Like, were you really talking about all women, all self-identifying women? Like, who are you really talking about? And are you ready for everybody to raise their voice? And like, what happens in your space when that happens? And if your space falls apart when everybody raises their voice, there's something to look at there, right?
Yeah, and for me, I always think about it as what is the fear there also? Like what is keeping any of these communities from being truly inclusive and giving everyone a voice? I don't think that, if you let someone with a different skin color amplify their message, that it's going to be so drastically different. I mean, my business and Flourish Media's business, as we talk about marketing. Marketing is marketing since PT Barnum. You know what I mean? It's the same thing. Whether I say it or someone else says it who's of a different complexion, different background, the material is generally the same. If you have a problem to solve for a community, your job in marketing is to prove and to show that you are the best person to solve that problem. And you're going to use all mediums in order to do that. That is the baseline of marketing. That's it. What is so dangerous if I'm the person who shares this information as opposed to my sister who doesn't look like me?
Yeah.
It's something to think about, because it really shouldn't be such a challenging conversation, but somehow it is. And I think that amplifies some things that have either been ignored or some beliefs um that the leadership in those particular groups are not ready to get rid of.
Yeah. And so, Vivian, I'm curious, kind of from your perspective, as a business owner, as a Black woman, if someone who might be watching, might be in a position where they have a small community or a large community, and they're kind of facing these questions right now. They're kind of like in the line where they're not really sure what to do, or how to navigate the differences that are coming up in the community. Because I think oftentimes what is the source of the conflict is that when Black women speak, oftentimes they have a truth that gets spoken about the dynamic in the community, or like the inherent racism that's happening. And then there's people that feel personally offended by that, and then like that sort of offense trumps everything else, and sort of it
Yeah.
becomes like the only thing that's happening, and then it just gets shut down altogether. So would you have any advice in terms of how to begin to handle that?
Well, I think that we first have to have an understanding of what racism is. Racism is an activity. It is something that you are taught. It is something that you practice, whether you know that you're practicing it or not. It's the same type of rhetoric as what I'm learning is when you take a look at colonialism in places outside of the US, or if you need to think of it as misogyny, you can think of it the same way. It's something that you are practicing and something that you have been taught, which means there should not be shame associated with you having racist behaviors. And that's the part that I think a lot of people don't want to deal with, is they want to say, no, that's not me at all, as opposed to, yes, there are parts of me in which I'm practicing this behavior, and now I want to change it because that's not the way that I want to be identified. You don't need to run away from the idea of being racist. If you were raised in a Western society, you are racist, baby, including me. Racist thought processes and everything. Okay. So that's the first thing. If you can accept that reality, it will help you so much more when you communicate with other people.
Yeah.
And also, I have to say that you're not fooling anybody by pretending not to be racist.
Yeah.
Nobody's fooled by that. I know when someone is talking down to me. I'm fully aware when I'm working with a particular business owner or a corporate entity and they ask me stupid ass questions that I know they don't ask my white counterparts, but I'm going to say, okay, let me put this together. And what that it's interpreted as, you don't have faith in my capabilities because you're asking me to prove myself so much. So
Lovely.
what do I, you know what I do? So I go out of my way. I'm very Googleable. There should be no doubt of my ability to serve any particular program or strategy because I'm very, very Googleable. That is done on purpose. It isn't done for my own accolades or because I want to see myself or anything like that. I want you to be very clear that if you are asking, there's a reasonable set of questions, but then when it gets to a certain point, it's like, listen, you either want to do business or you don't. And I mean, what else can I do here? You know what I mean? And I think that if you're in a community and you want to address these things, my ask to you is to be authentic with your desire to open up this conversation because it is a rough and dirty conversation. It brings up a lot of emotion for everybody on every side. And you're not obligated to not be racist. I want to tell you that too.
Mm-hmm.
I would prefer that you not be a racist or a white supremacist or anything of that nature. I would prefer that you love on all of um, our trans community and our homosexuals and everybody questioning and everybody. I would love that of you. But you're not fooling anybody if you're pretending to care about these things and you don't. And I think that also can create a tremendous backlash when you have companies that say, they're putting out these statements that they care about inclusion, that they care about the Black people in their community. But then when you look at their executive board, everybody looks the same. When you
Yeah.
look at their middle management, everybody looks the same. And I mean, they look like this, not like this, and not like this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's, how realistic, how real do you take those statements
Yeah.
when, or, and even in the social media world, there's a number of influencers, those who are the most highly viewed on YouTube, for example, who have repeatedly shown themselves to be racist, have done
Yeah.
blackface, have done all kinds of things for many, many years. And you wonder, how are those people able to be forgiven so many times? They're not forgiven. The brands who are spending the money on advertising don't care about Black people to the same degree that these influencers do not care about Black people. So they're going to continue to make their money doing these offensive topics and saying these things because nobody cares.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what it is. You just don't care. And I mean, and you don't have to, but don't waste your energy pretending like you do, as if Black people are stupid and are going to think, oh, yeah, you're great because you put out a statement.
There
No,
was
it doesn't come.
something that you said reminded me of something that Brene Brown posted yesterday. And she said, being held accountable for racism and feeling shame is not the same thing as being shamed. And I thought that that was like such an important distinction. Lucy always talks about how the fact that guilt can be helpful. So that I think like it's I think it's important for us to keep reiterating that because that's where it starts. Because all of those all of that leadership that doesn't want to take like the broad action that because I do think that this work, the most beautiful way that I have contextualized the work of becoming anti-racist is like reclaiming our humanity. Like it's literally us coming back to each other as full humans, right? And so in that work, it starts from a deeply personal place of being able to say like, you know what, I'm feeling guilty and I'm feeling shame about how I've addressed things up until now, and I can acknowledge that. I can let that guilt and that feeling of shame be helpful in my evolution and in my desire to authentically want to create something else. Like have it come
Mm-hmm.
from that place, not have it come from a place of, oh, I effed up, I'm going to like do something different now so that people think that I am not a racist, right? Like really have it come.
Yeah.
It's those efforts are not going to be fruitful. People are going to see right through them. People are not stupid. right? Like that's been happening time and time again. And I think like what, like to kind of close out the kind of community conversation, I feel like particularly for communities and for communities of self-identifying women like the ones that we work at, I think that the question has now been on the table, and it's essentially really clear. It's like, are you a community for all self-identifying women, or are you a community for white and white passing women? Because that's what it comes down to. Like that is literally what it comes down to. And you may not want to say those words out loud, but to the extent that you are not doing the work to make sure that all other women, that Black women, that Indigenous women, that other Latina women that are of different racial backgrounds feel 100% welcome in your space and ready to be fully who they are and be celebrated for those differences, until that happens, you're a community for white and white passing women. And that might be a tough pill to swallow, but that's exactly what we're talking about here, right? Like we're talking about how do we create those environments where we're all feeling welcome and we're all feeling like we belong in these spaces. And so I also wanted to spend some time with Vivian talking about something that both her and I find really fascinating, because Vivian still works with these large organizations and large corporate clients. I definitely used to, and I still very much geek out at watching them put out like statements and press releases and sort of marketing initiatives that look really glossy. We've seen a lot of Black Lives Matter Instagram posts from a lot of big companies, and we've also seen some moves that have been interesting. I feel like it'd be really good to unpack like what happened with the Aunt Jemima brand right now, for example.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, like let's kind of talk a little bit about what we're seeing from a broader standpoint. And even before getting into it, I do want to acknowledge, I really feel like the god of this country is money. And so capitalism is how you, like, this is how I know we're winning. When like every single company, every single Fortune 500 company like puts out a statement, at least starting there with Black Lives Matter, this is how I know we're winning, because this is the barometer of like what matters in this country. And so corporate America has taken a pulse and realized that there is no future in white supremacy. Now, how do they internalize that? Let's talk.
Yes. So from one marketing geek to the other, yes. So, you know, because we sit around and we're just kind of watching and say, okay, this, first and foremost, we need to acknowledge that America, the colonies, all the, you know, this whole area, our imperialist powers that came from Europe needed to make more money and suffer from intense greed, and in doing so sent their voyagers over, Columbus and all the sort. And no matter what you saw in Pocahontas, Disney's version, they didn't come as explorers. They came to get money. If you've seen the movie Avatar, you remember how they're willing to kill those people in order to do the mining. Same business, okay? America cares about money. Anything that is going to challenge their ability to make money will immediately be changed. Period. So, Gabby, you're so right to say that, you know, if corporate America is standing on this, then then we're making change, and that's true. So, when it comes to Aunt Jemima, there's so many layers here, because we can't pretend like slavery didn't happen. But I think the thing that has been the most detrimental to the way that we connect with each other today is really Jim Crow America, because that's when institutionalized racism was given to our grandparents. And I like to say our grandparents because it's very easy to say, you know, slavery happened 400 years ago and that's so bad and blah, blah, blah. But Jim Crow was our grandparents, meaning they're people who woke up, the children who woke up and stood on their doorstep and saw burning crosses. They are still alive. And the children who watch their parents go and get the wood and put the kerosene and burn those crosses in front of those front yards, those people are still alive, and their kids and are some of our parents, some of our grandparents too, that are working in corporate America and won't retire. and have these thought processes and have to come to terms with these things. And I want you all to really sit with that. This isn't ancient history. This is something that's going on now, currently. So when we look at someone, a figure like Aunt Jemima, she at one time embodies the ability for a Black family to have legacy, for a Black woman to have some form of entrepreneurship and independence, for someone to be used and marginalized as a thing as opposed to a person, and for someone to be pushed into the corner into positions and jobs that are basically very demeaning. They're very demeaning. She is all those things at once, which
Mhm.
is it is the richness of America, where we have so many wonderful things here in this country, and we have a lot of messiness, and they are intertwined. They live together as one. So when it comes to removing Aunt Jemima from the advertising, some of the things that came up in the group in a conversation that we've already had is that it feels like there wasn't any consideration given to the legacy of that woman. Now, I don't know, I have not seen their paperwork, but it would be interesting to me to know if the family was receiving any type of royalties from her being on these items.
Yeah,
I
I
would
would hope so, right?
I would hope so. But because of the time frame and because of the way we know corporate America can be, I bet that she wasn't. I bet
Mhm.
she wasn't getting anything, because if she was, then they would have some type of obligation to pay out the family to say, okay, we're going to end this contract.
Yeah.
We're going to move on into another direction. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. But what it feels like is that it was just a rush to do something so that they can say we did something. But who benefits from her removal and who asked for it also?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it's so many different layers, and I think one of the things that also is another factor in this that we were talking about in the group is it goes back to the authenticity, right? It goes back to like, why are you really doing this? And if that is really like, if becoming an anti-racist organization is your intent, then like there's so many other questions about like, okay, so what does your executive board look like? What does your C-level executives look like? What kind of leadership programs do you have that are accessible to Black people? Like, what are all the opportunities? How are you paying people? Are you paying people a living wage? Like all of those different questions that are inherently tied to kind of running that kind of an organization.
Very much so. I mean, and the question that comes up is, or that came up was, is this something that Black Lives Matter asked for? And I thought that was such an interesting question, because I've seen a meme going around where it's like Black Lives Matter asked for a vanilla cone, and they're getting all these sundaes, but you
Mm-hmm.
still just wanted the vanilla cone, because Breonna Taylor is police officers who killed her. They are still free. They're not in jail. They
Yes.
haven't been convicted, and that's what Black Lives Matter has been asking for,
Exactly.
is for the police officers who are a part of all of these killings
Yeah.
over many years now at this point, go to jail for what they did. That's
Yeah.
what the ask is,
Yeah.
and that has not been honored. And then it's been taken over by several different organizations who are doing a great job to show that they care about Black Lives Matter. I mean, I love that I can look on Netflix and have a whole series of Black related things to watch. That's very nice.
Yeah.
It's great that different Confederate statues are being taken down, because I don't know anywhere where the losers are celebrated in such a way. And we have to acknowledge that none of these statues were put up immediately
Exactly. Yeah.
after the Confederacy. They were put up by organizations that believe in white supremacy to tell a story. The same efforts, the same group were the same people who took over the education system and are actually the standard that reviews all of our textbooks right now. All of the textbooks are reviewed for California and Texas, and where California and Texas make their purchases, the whole rest of the United States makes those same purchases. So that same organization that's reviewing our textbooks in schools is the same organization that raised money and paid to have these Confederate statues put up in different cities. They are not there because they were commemorating something or because of, because of some kind of celebration. We have to get rid of saying that to people because that's not true.
Yeah.
So these are things that we just have to take into account.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because I feel like there is a misconception that everything that's happening, it's because of quote unquote Black Lives Matter. And it's kind of fascinating because Black Lives Matter has become a true movement because the ripple effects of what they have brought forth to attention, it's like you can't see racism in one spot and then unsee it in like everywhere else in our lives, right? So I feel like I think it's been really important that it start because police brutality is such an urgent issue to address, right? And especially like when it comes to Black people. And so once you understand and acknowledge and see the urgency of that, then you're like, oh, but what about like in colleges? What about in education? What about in the workplace? What about it? So all of a sudden you see racism what about in our historical symbols? What about in our history books? And so it's happening, but not everything that is happening is because it was a demand of quote unquote Black Lives Matter. It's just the ripple effect of that, and understanding like the point that you just made. It's important to stress it that we get to keep coming back to the demands of Black Lives Matter. That Breonna Taylor's like killers are still free. Like been over 100 days and they're just hanging out, right? And so yes, we are starting to see more accountability, and it's not nearly enough. And it's so critical that we keep the foot on the gas with this, for sure.
Yes, and one of the ripple effects that I've been noticing is that we're seeing more and more minorities and I would say Black women who are running for office. And we have to remember that, or maybe not have to remember, but I will acknowledge that I've seen several different posts, videos, proclamations, blogs, articles, this realization that, oh yeah, my politics should reflect my beliefs.
Yeah.
And for somebody, I mean, when we started this conversation, you all know I wanted to work in the Foreign Affairs Office. I have a deep education in political science. I actually taught political science online at a college level for 3 years. It's something that I do just so that when I'm paying Sally Mae, I don't feel like I'm wasting all my money. And so, it's just I teach one class just because I like to do it, and it keeps my mind fresh. And our politics should reflect our morals as much as possible.
Yes.
That's a part of the way that our entire government is structured. We're supposed to see a reflection of our beliefs in the way that we govern ourselves in our states and collectively at a federal level. So I hope that as you're looking at these different ripple effects of what's going on, that these things do affect the way that you vote. And I know that we try to it's good to stay as diplomatic as possible, but I'm going to go ahead and say it because my morals and my beliefs align in a very specific way. So when I say that I want you to register to vote and I say that you should go and vote, I'm specifically telling you not to vote for Donald Trump. That's what I'm saying to you. Okay. Not speaking for anybody else, but that's from me. Because what I'm seeing is there is a rhetoric and a belief system that aligns with voting in that way that has given a very negative outcome, and it has empowered people to behave in such a way that it feels like we are living in the 1960s, 50s, and 70s, where I thought protests about civil rights and lynchings and hurting and attacking transgendered and gay people, and just treating people as if they are not human, was something that we were doing in the past. But since we seem to be doing it now, let me say it again, that when I tell you and I encourage you to register to vote and to go and vote, I am not asking you to vote for Donald Trump.
Amen to that. Amen to that. And it's a true reflection of your values. I think if you're the kind of person that's watching this right now and aligning with the values and the principles that are the foundation for this conversation in the first place, then your politics should reflect that, because there are very real policy implications, and that people live every single day, and the tone that is being said and the rhetoric that is being discussed, and the sort of the leadership that we have should be reflective of who we are and what is important to us. Absolutely. And so I would love to close this out just by asking you, what are some concrete ways that we can support Black women entrepreneurs? And I know that we can definitely obviously patron their businesses, support them and give them money, buy their beautiful things, support their brilliance. But do you have any other ideas for how we can all be in support of Black women and their ventures?
Well, I think the number one way, and you've already said it, is to simply hire them and be patrons of their businesses. I don't think that Black people or any minority or any business owner is looking for a charity or a handout. They simply believe and know that they can solve a problem for you, and they want to be considered. So consider them, spend your money with them. Secondly, you are, and all of us have access to different communities where we are in rooms that a lot of these Black business owners will never be in. They will never be considered. They will never be invited. They will never be brought into these spaces. So that means it's up to you when you're in these environments to suggest these individuals or bring up their names or share their material, share their abilities with others. That can be such a powerful support, and it doesn't cost you anything to say, you know what, you know who would be good for this job, you know who would be great for this role, you know what company does that or can do it. Just mention their name and give out their contact information. I think the last thing that I would say that you can do to support Black businesses is to treat them like you would treat any other business, meaning don't assume or pursue deep discounts just because the businesses ran or operated by a Black person. Don't expect for them to give you 150% of work in which you've paid 60% for. There needs to be a realistic alignment between what you are paying for and what you should expect to get. Just like they are not slaves on a plantation who should give you bundles of cotton for free, don't expect them to be able to give you services that you have not paid for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love what you said about, because there's even women in our community who've spoken about, oh, I belong to other communities where they're not having these conversations. And, if you feel called to be the one to sort of bring it up, and you can do it in a very authentic and honest and respectful way, but just say, hey, I think this is important and I think we need to be talking about it here. And really highlighting those Black women and bringing them to the forefront and being, you can be, if you have the opportunity in you to be the champion to bring people with you, then do it. Use that privilege. One of the privilege, we talk about it and it is something to be acknowledged, but it is also something to be used for the greater good.
Yes.
So if you have that privilege and you have the ability and the means to use it for the greater good, by all means, go to town, right? Beautiful. All right, Miss Vivian, thank you so much. This has been, as always, incredibly enlightening, and it's always such a wonderful time with you. And you look so great in your Comadre shirt, and Vivian is going to be expecting in a few weeks, so we're also very excited about. Check it out. There were a few moments there where you looked like you were like getting a little out of breath, and I'm like, oh, I remember that.
Oh yeah, it happens.
So we're very, very thrilled and excited for this comadrita to come into the world. Thank you so much, Vivian. We love you. Thank you for spending this time with us. Bye.
Thank you for having me. Bye.